Welcome to Rock That Relationship, a podcast about all things relationship with Corey and Tracy.
Now let's get real and start creating relationships that rock.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Rock That Relationship. We are just so excited to have on. I'm going to call you our resident astrologer because now you've been on. This is your second time, so I feel like you're our go-to for these things. So Bethany, you're here with us today to talk a little bit about the secret energetics of relationships. So thanks for being here, Bethany. We're so excited to have you back.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, awesome. Maybe you could tell us, some of our listeners heard you many seasons ago, but a lot has happened since then. What's new with you? What kind of work are you working on right now? And can you tell us a little bit about your new book, The Secret Energetics of Relationships?
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like the last time I was on, I talked a little bit about astrological compatibility, and I've kind of expanded a little bit of what I do also to include the astrocartography, which is the locational astrology. And that kind of came out of people being like, am I even in the right place to have a relationship? I feel like I can't meet anybody here. So that kind of blossomed from that. And then doing just sort of the pure energetics work as well, of just having sessions with people where I'm just tuning into their energy and then using the astrology to kind of help pinpoint maybe some of the specifics of what's going on with them.
When you say in the right place, are you talking like geographically, or are you talking about emotionally?
It's always tied, right? It's always tied. But yeah, I was getting people saying that they felt like they were ready, but they couldn't meet the right kind of people where they were, or things weren't falling into place there. And so they would be asking, like, am I even in the right city? Like, is this where I need to be? And I was getting that question so much that I was like, okay, I'm going to learn how to do this. And there's not many astrocartographers out there. It's kind of a newer practice that came around kind of in the 70s, but it's still kind of a burgeoning field. So I was like, let me learn how to do this. And it's just really kind of taken off. Like, people love it, especially now with all of the changes, and people are really wanting to know, where do I belong? Where do I fit in? Where can I go to meet people or find my community or start my spiritual retreat or whatever it is that they're looking to do.
Not only are you our resident astrologer, you're my astrologer now, because I did a lot of sessions with you, right? We had I think 6-month stretch, and you actually did my astrocartography, which I found very helpful. Because I know I'm not in the right place, but I'm not also at the right time to move. So you've been very helpful to me in like trying to deal with being stuck and not being able to fix that right now, And I think a lot of that translates over to relationships as well. And I don't think you're a huge fan of staying in a relationship that isn't working. And this whole season's about thriving in relationships. So how do you figure out, like, are you thriving or are you not? What does that even mean? What does it mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're growing, if you're expanding, and seriously, if you feel happy in your relationship, then you're on the right path. And it's not that relationships are cakewalks all the time. You're going to have disagreements and growing pains. But if you're miserable, if you're trudging through the mud all the time, if you feel like there's just so many incompatible places, that's kind of surviving. That's sort of forcing your free will onto a relationship. Really, ease, flow, and joy should be very present in our relationships. And to me, that's the sense of thriving, where you're not having to like force or push and really kind of make things happen. Because I think that's sort of a metric that sometimes people will put on themselves of, well, I'm in this relationship and it's happening, so that means it must be aligned. And it's like, no, we have free will. We can push anything we want to. It's just, is that the relationship you want? And you'll learn, right? You'll learn, even if you're forcing a relationship, it's not like you're not going to learn anything, but is that the way you want to learn it? There might be better ways to do it. And so that's kind of the art of intuition and the subtle reminders the universe gives us. And I think just sort of backing off and getting into that ease and flow, you'll start seeing that subtle kind of pushback from the universe a lot more quickly. And then you really recognize what is thriving and anything that's not.
Well, that's super interesting. And was that, what was really the drive for you to write this book, The Secret Energetics of Relationships? is it all about this ease and flow and joy, or is there something, what exactly is energetics?
Yeah, I felt like I was getting the same kind of questions from clients or on interviews or in features in magazines. It seems like there's a real, similarity to the types of questions you get. And so the book was really meant to kind of address those. And so a lot of those are, how do I meet people? How do I get into the relationship? Because setting it up in alignment is really going to take off the table a lot of the issues down the road. A lot of the issues that I see are incompatibilities that could have been addressed or recognized all the way back in the dating scene. But again, it's that free will push, right? And so that was kind of one of the things I would get. And then it was like a lot of, well, how do I know if the date went well? How do I know if this is the person I should be in a relationship with? And then of course you have I'm in a relationship, it's not going well. How do I fix this? And then I also get people kind of on the tail end of a relationship where they're like, I'm leaving this relationship. How do I do that gracefully? When do I start dating again? What's on the other side of that? And they're really kind of simple answers. And so I kind of just put them together in the book to sort of guide that. And then, the big questions too, a lot of people have are like, I keep getting in the same relationships. I keep dating the same person. And that's energetics, right? That's something that we're creating. And energetics are really kind of what astrology represents, right? When we're talking about Aries, zodiac signs, we're talking about what is your energetic output? What is your blueprint for kind of how you operate in life? And we do this all the time, right? Like we can walk into a room at a party and you're like, oh my gosh, it's so awkward in here. And like nobody has said a word, but you just pick it up because we're energetic beings and we're always feeding off of each other. And you can see in relationships, some people just seem to kind of flow and communicate and there's ease. And I can say like, oh, well, it's because you're this and you're that. But below that, it's that compatibility is energetics. What is the energy that you're giving and what are you taking in and how are those interacting? And that's the same with when you're talking zodiac compatibility, elemental compatibility of, okay, you're an earth sign, you're a water sign. What is the energy of earth? Like if you were to describe it to me, I bet you could, right? And what is the energy of water? And you can decide how those two interact with each other. So to me, that's energetics. And I feel like the astrology is just kind of giving words and kind of a blueprint to something that really we can sort of pick up on our own. It's just kind of a quick hack. Like it's learning to navigate with the map that we're being given.
Could we use the word vibes for energetics? Like I'm vibing.
I use that all the time.
Is it the same?
Yeah, it's pretty much the same, right? Because if I were to say like, what's the Aries vibe, you could describe it, right? And that would be energetic words that you would be using. You'd be like, oh, they're really like forward and pushy and kind of aggressive, but that's an energy, right? Like you can pick up an energy of someone's aggression just by being in the room with them, or in their voice. What are they saying? What are the words they're using? We're really good at this stuff. We just have been taught to really shut it down or push it away or think it's going to be really big and loud. But intuition and signs are actually very subtle, very soft. So we're really, really good at this stuff. And so really that's more, I think, what the book is about too, is helping people remember how to do this because we're naturally very good at it.
And people override that, I think, particularly women, right? I mean,
yeah.
That whole book about the gift of fear, which really is about your intuition and feeling like honoring what you actually feel. And I think that's the case for a lot of relationships, right? People are taught, okay, well, you need to grow up, get in a relationship, be in the relationship. Many people's examples of that aren't healthy and thriving. And then they kind of stick around, which, have I done that? Yes, a lot. But like now I'm learning. I've had a good, few teachers on that, but, like how important is that? I mean, like how important is the vibe?
It's everything. Even if you don't know, it's everything. It's everything. It's completely how you're operating in the world and with other people. And when we learn to control it, that's even the next step above it. But we do just kind of have inherent qualities, energetics that sort of ride in us, right? That just sort of operate naturally, just the same way that, and it's not that we want to control and morph every single aspect, but if I'm having a bad day and I have a client, I learn to control that. I've learned how to sort of work through that so that when I come into the session, my energy's not coming with me into that. So we can control sort of that output, and we can use other people as the reflection of what we're putting out. So if I'm going out into the world, I'm getting a lot of really aggressive interactions from people. I can look at that as, okay, the astrology of the day, I know what's going on with that. Or I can also look at it as, what am I putting out that's getting this reaction from people, right? So you can start to sort of calibrate it and control it. And we just haven't learned how to do that a lot of the time. We just think that we wake up and this is how we are and this is how our day is going to go. Or we think that how we interact with people, that's it, right? And that's where astrology kind of gets a bad rap sometimes, where people use it as their excuse mechanism of like, well, I'm an Aries, this is just how I am. It's like, that's your baseline, but we can do better than baseline, right? Like we can learn to control that and work with it and point it in the right direction.
So can your like energetics change, or is like, am I as a Virgo, are my energetics relatively set, but I can kind of control them in certain situations?
Are set, Corey.
Well, I know me
population, but
probably, but I'm just thinking like you're in a relationship and you have different energetics than your partner. Is it like that's a lost cause, or can you work together with your energetics to bring that into a better space?
You can absolutely bring it to a better space. Will you get it to the most ideal space of a relationship? Maybe yes, maybe no. I think there is kind of a compatibility set point where you can morph it, you can make it fit, but again, it's like, do you want to? Is this comfortable? Is this natural for you? But I think with astrology, there's different aspects that come out in our relationships. And so you might be more moon-centered in how you interact with different partners, or you might have different energetics come up depending on different transits. So you can kind of have like shadowy periods where you might be enacting a different energetic more than your baseline Virgo. But I think the way that you look at the world is always going to kind of be in that Virgo vibe, right? Like the way that you process information, the way that you value things, the way that you see things and organize the world around you. Like, is a Virgo ever not going to be disorganized? Like, probably not.
Right. Like, makes me uncomfortable when you even suggest it. I'm like,
yeah,
oh,
exactly. Like, no. But that's like an inherent nature. But that's Virgo's gift. I think that's part of what we want to recognize too. Is like, yeah, you can shift and change, but that's a gift. We need the Virgos. Like, we need it so much sometimes because they're grounded, they're centered, they're organized. They can have tough conversations with people. They can do all of those things. That's their gift. Like, we want them to use that. We don't want them to ever try to be a Cancer or anything else. But, can they be too in the Virgo where they're like controlling? And of course, but like, that's the same with every sign. They have their shadow, they have their gifts, they have all of those things. So like, I think that's kind of the gift of the compatibility, is like when you're really recognizing your true inherent nature, you're embracing that, and you don't need to change it as much. You need to recognize it and, kind of work with that. But you're looking to find someone that aligns with you, that aligns with that, not to try to morph where everybody's cutting themselves in half to fit into that. But yeah, your Virgo-ness is always going to be your Virgo-ness. And you are a very good Virgo example, Corey. Like,
I'm like
actually, both of you have a lot of Virgo vibes.
She is the poster child of Virgos. But, like differing from attachment styles, like attachment styles come, I think, from obviously childhood, maybe trauma, maybe, not trauma, like having a secure attachment. And those things can change over time based on your experiences, right? But astrology and astrological signs, I mean, those are kind of imprinted from birth. And a lot of people make fun of it or think it's kind of woo-woo. But really, it is interesting how people really do fit into those, and how I always can pick up vibes, and I've always honored that. I haven't always done that in relationships. I've kind of ignored that stuff at, things that I feel at the beginning. But I do think it's super, super important. And I have your book right here. Here's your book, which I love. And it's like separated into 3 parts, right? The beginning, the middle, and the end. Why? Is that like the basic timeline of a relationship, the beginning, the middle, and the end?
Yeah, and I wanted to make it accessible for people as far as where they were in their relationships, because if they're already in one, they might not necessarily want to know the dating aspect right now. Maybe they're a little bit more interested in like, okay, how do I realign, or how do I make the most of the relationship I'm in? Or if they're ending the relationships, just so they can kind of navigate the book in the way it's not necessarily, you have to read it from beginning to end, right? Like you can go to whatever's calling to you at that moment. And then, you can read the rest on your own kind of timeline. But yeah, I just wanted to make it kind of navigable for people, I guess.
That's such a great way of doing it too, because once you're in like a really good relationship, you don't want to go back and have your flashbacks of trying to do dating. I mean, sometimes that can be really hard, but, as a writer, I love this question where it's, what was your favorite part of the book to write? Because I think it really shows like what you feel most connected to, or maybe most passionate about, or most proud of. Was there a part of the book that you just felt like you were in the flow? Like that was your like highest self when you were writing?
Yeah, I mean, I felt like the book was very channeled in general. Like it just kind of came out. But the dating funnel, which is kind of at the beginning, just felt like such a sigh of relief to kind of get it out, to get it in the flow, because that's like, I feel like 90% of the work I'm doing right now is helping convince people that they don't have to settle for things below this bottom line. We're collectively raising the bottom line of what we deserve. Especially as women, we really are taught a lot of mess about this is fine, I can get around this. Or we're also taught a lot of that burden of having to get along with people or things. Like we're delegated as the peacemakers a lot of the time, just as being female. It's like, well, yeah, this person's causing a lot of disruption, but it's on you to like get along with them and be okay with it. So we kind of take that paradigm into our relationships of, okay, I have to get along with this person. I have to make it work. I can't be judgmental of this person going through something. I can't be mean. I don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. Like these are the things I hear a lot. And so the dating funnel for me was just very much like, no, we can funnel this stuff out. Like we can do it in a way that's very like clean and compassionate and kind, but we don't have to put up with any of that. And it's not mean to tell someone, I don't want a second date, or like, I'm not interested in a second date. That's actually not mean, right? But the number of women, especially, and men sometimes too, right? It's not just women, but
it's largely women.
Right? Yeah, but especially women are like, but I don't want to hurt his feeling. And it's like, but it's not actually mean, right? But we're taught any kind of rejection or, anything that we're not
doing, like acquiescing to someone else's desire, right?
Right. Like, oh, well, they want a second date, so I should just go even though I don't want to. Like, so I think the dating funnel for me was so big of like, no, you can funnel all of that out. Like, you don't have to live that way. You don't have to date that way. You don't have to be in a relationship with everyone that wants to be in a relationship with you. And that's okay. So I think for me, that was my like just sigh of relief to just sort of like get it out there. And because I feel like when you get that alignment going from the beginning, I mean, that's like, God, like 80% of everything else down the line is just going to be off the table because you're in that ease, you're in that flow, you're in that compatibility, and if you can set it up that way from the get-go, oh my God, your relationship is so much easier, right? Like you're going to hit road bumps, but they're going to be so much more simple to navigate because you're not just like wildly incompatible, or you're guilted into a relationship, or you're like, well, I guess I should be in a relationship, or this makes sense, or
but you're talking a lot about boundaries, I feel like, and that's something that I learned from you. And so people should know that you work with individuals. And I really did not have boundaries before I worked with you. And I thought boundaries were rude. And I didn't like it did not ever occur to me to like set up parameters for what I wanted. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we're not taught that. And I think that's something to really recognize too, because people feel guilty or like, how did I not see that? But like, when we come to the world, we're new here, right? We're looking around trying to figure it out. If you're not taught something, it's hard for you to learn it, right? It's hard for you to figure it out. You have to kind of start from the baseline of putting out small boundaries and then bigger boundaries. But like, how would you're not just born knowing how to do this stuff. You're not born knowing healthy communication. And if all you've had are boundaries used as weapons or poor communication in your house, like, where else are you going to learn how to have these healthy things? You have to teach yourself. So it's like, there's no shame in us not knowing how to do that. We're not taught it, and society sure doesn't help women out on that front. And so there's no shame in it, right? Like, it's just like, and I had to learn all of this stuff like the hardest way. So like my hope moving forward for people is like, please benefit from my experiences, like, because I also didn't have good boundaries and I had to learn them step by step, which is why I feel like I'm good at helping other people do that, because I'm like, I get what you're thinking and here's why that's not truthful, right? Like, this is how you can do it. So like, that's really my hope, is that people can take, the experiences I have and not have to go through them maybe the way that I had to go through them, right? Like,
well, that's the whole point of our podcast, right? That's why. And when we had you on the first time and now we're having you on again, I mean, it's interesting for me to have not met you before and now to know you, and that you've helped me so much. And like, my life is so different because of the impact you've had on it. I mean, really, I don't know if you really know that, but I've told you that before, but it's true. Like, I've changed so much, and all for the better for me. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a different paradigm. I think once you start to prioritize yourself, it's not that you are, pushing other people aside or whatever. And I think that a lot of women in particular think that prioritizing yourself is not helpful, and they don't see that as part of a thriving relationship, right? Everybody talks about relationship as being sacrifice and compromise and this and that, but I don't think that it has to be. And Corey asked me this question in another podcast, like, what was that question about? Have I had, was it easy relationships, or like, I forgot. Do you remember what that was, Corey? Like, how many relationships have I had that have been like
thriving, just thriving?
Oh yeah, I've never had a thriving relationship. Yeah. And so it's interesting to do this whole season on that, right? Because my goal is to get to that. And chapter 9 in your book is the goal is evolution. And the goal of relationships is to bring you to a higher place. Like, if it's not helping you, then don't have it in your life. And I think people have a really hard time getting to that. And we have had Coach Dorothy on before, who talks about your life as a sundae, and then the other person is just a cherry on top. And I think that's very similar to what you're saying, is don't have this. If it's not making your life better or enhancing it in some way, then you really shouldn't be in it. Am I reading that wrong?
No, that's really it. And I think the same with a lot of the concepts in the book. Like, when you haven't had those things, you have to walk out on faith a little bit. Like, you have to kind of trust what people are telling you as far as like, no, this is possible. You can have it. Because once you do have it, you've locked that paradigm in and you will not move backwards from that. So once you have that thriving relationship, or you have even just like the ease and flow of something moving naturally, you're like, why did I accept anything that wasn't this? You won't go backwards from there, but it takes a little while sometimes to get there. So you're having to walk out on faith a little bit that those things do exist and those types of relationships exist, and they can build you up instead of tear you down. But then once you kind of lock that in, like, you got it, and you will see it from that point on, pretty much. And it's not that every relationship will be perfect. You still might have some that don't go the distance, right? Like, but they won't be, you just have that new bottom line, right? So like, if they don't go the distance, it's because, oh, we're just not maybe compatible for the long term, but it's not like, oh, this person's abusive or this person's stealing from me, or like, there's just a different bottom line that you start going, and you have like more peaceful parting of ways too. Like, everything in the relationships becomes more peaceful because you don't have that bottom line that's rock bottom. You have it much higher. So then everything about the relationship improves, and everything about your life improves, and you're not, all of your energy isn't taken up in the relationship being like, are they mad at me? Why haven't they responded to me? What are we doing here? Why are they yelling? Are they drunk again? Like, I don't know. There's so many ways our energy gets pulled that way. But when you're thriving in a relationship, that just sort of disappears. Like, that's just not really on your radar, and you understand that if you do have disagreements, they're not going to be as dramatic or intense as maybe what they've been before, because you've set up that dating funnel and you have that alignment from the get-go. So the value in the relationship is thriving. That's what you're both looking for. And that's very different than somebody who has kind of lower intentions for their relationship, or that are looking to just fill these like baseline needs out of a relationship.
Right. Like it's this is good enough, or I'm getting too old. I need this to find someone, those kind of things. What do you do if you're like in a relationship? So people are going to be listening to this. So like, I'm in a relationship. I don't think it's thriving. What can I do? Is there anything energetically that people who are already coupled up might be able to do to get their relationship to a point of thriving? Or is it they're just, the compatibility sort of gets in the way so much that it will be a struggle, or it will be a forced push as they move forward?
I mean, I think it really depends on the relationship itself. I think if you are in a relationship that is incredibly dramatic or chaotic, or could be qualified as abusive, right? Whether it's verbal or emotional or financial or whatever it is, that's not really something energetically you can fix, right? Like that's something you need to sort of walk away from. If you feel like the compatibility is just off, or you feel like it's not thriving because you have different interests, or somebody's not maybe doing enough self-work, but they're not necessarily abusive, but they're just kind of like, you feel like just not in the same playing field as you. Those are things that you could energetically sort of work on. There is going to be a point where compatibility, you're going to cross the line where you're having to give up aspects of yourself in order to work with this relationship, right? But again, that's very subtle, and it very much depends on the people in it. So it's not a hard and fast answer. Yes, you can energetically work on something to raise the vibration of the relationship. One person in the relationship can raise their vibration, and it will affect the other person. At what point do you feel like you're dragging them along behind you? Like, that's individual, right? And I think if you're not kind of striving against each other in ways that are improving you, both of you, kind of going higher and higher in the relationship, to me, I think you can do better. But that's a hard reality to be in. That's easier to recognize if you've been casually dating a few months, then you're like, well, we've been married 10 years and we have 3 kids. Like, what do you want me to do now? Yep. So like, yep. If that's the situation you're in, like, I would say give it a try, right? Like, talk to them. And you might be surprised because, one client I worked with was like inches from divorce. And I usually don't take clients that close to divorce because that's just a lot of pressure on me to try to like figure that out for them. But he was really close to that. And I was like, well, have you talked to her about this stuff? And he's like, no, she won't handle it well. And like, blah, blah. And I was like, you cannot just like moonwalk out of this relationship without saying something. Like, yep. No, like you've got to get in there and at least just tell her, like, you don't have to blame her for anything. You don't have to do anything. Just, I mean, I think one of the best relationship hacks is just say how you feel like that. And then ask the other person how they feel and watch that magic happen, because you don't have to have an answer. You don't have to have any reason or logic behind it. But I mean, when you're in your darkest places, if somebody comes to you and is like, hey, like, what are you feeling? That's actually magic, because you will reveal everything that you're trying to cover up, right? So he went to his wife and he just was like, I feel really disengaged from this relationship. I feel really like unsatisfied. I don't feel connected to it all. I don't know what happened. You know, we had such a great relationship, blah, blah. And she was literally like, oh, thank God you said that. Me too. Like, that's how I feel too. Like, what happened here? Mm-hmm. And so they're much better. They got into like a traditional therapy. They are not divorced. They are like, they had this like relationship or this conversation where they were like crying for 2 hours and like digging through it. And like, they've worked on stuff. I don't know if they're going to, you know, be together for the rest of their lives or whatever, but he was saying like, even if we were to go our separate ways, like, I feel like we could do it as friends. Like, we could do it cleanly, you know, because we both feel the same way about it. So like, you would actually be very surprised sometimes about other people might actually be feeling the same way you do. They just don't want to say it because they don't want to hurt your feelings. And you don't want to hurt their feelings, or you're guessing how they're going to react. But I think the best thing you can do is just be honest and say like, I don't feel fulfilled, and just see where that goes. Like, you might be surprised by that conversation, you know?
But it brings up 2 interesting things. And I'm seeing this every time I get a new client, you know, in family law, and I talk to them, like, are you really done? Like, are you done with this relationship? Mm-hmm. Is this really what you want? Because not all people are at that stage when they call a divorce lawyer. They just maybe want to get information or whatever. But it is interesting how many people don't actually talk to the other person. And they, I just talked to somebody yesterday who was married for 10 years and she's like, well, I don't know. I don't know if he wants this house. I don't know. It's like, how can you not know? Like, because people don't talk. So there's the opposite of that story where you go to that person and you say, I feel disconnected and whatever. And then they don't talk. And I think that's very telling, right? In a relationship is like, what is that other person capable of giving you? And, I'm going to read one of the lines from your book. You can force almost any relationship to work, quote unquote, work, as in keep it together, with Band-Aids and silly string. But is that the goal? Is that a win? Is that what you really want? And that's the thing, like, that's what you led me to is I've spent 30 something years trying to make a lot of things work that didn't. I'm friends with several of those people and that's great. And I'm really glad about that. And I learned from all those relationships, but like for me, that's no longer worth it. And it's not a win, and I think there's such like a societal thing about being in relationship, like that it's so important for us. And that, we have to make it work. And I was that person and something in me changed after the last situation. And, I learned from that person walking away from me to protect her own boundaries that I didn't really like a lot of the stuff that was going on, but I was tolerating it because I thought, oh, well, this is how it has to be. And I made a commitment to this person, but it wasn't making me happy, Yeah.
And I think that's a very Virgo thing to do also is like Virgo is very like, I've made this commitment, so I'm going to see it through. And like, you see these relationships where Virgos just being like dragged along behind the relationship, but they're like, I'm still in this, like, because they're so committed, they're so loyal, and that's such a beautiful aspect of Virgo. But I think that's also something women really have going on, again, where they're like, I have to make this work, I have to fix it. But yeah, no, everything is a choice. We have free will, we have the choice of what we want our relationships to look like and how we want to live our lives and the people that we want in it. And so I think the commitment can shift from I'm going to be in this to I'm going to hold my integrity no matter what happens. And part of that integrity is being yourself and saying your truth, right? Not covering things up or not cutting things in half to try to make it work. But Virgo is very good about integrity, right? Like they're very strong in that. So instead of putting the integrity on the relationship, they can put it on themselves of like, how am I showing up in this relationship? And if I'm recognizing it's not working, that's something I can do something about. And that's still being in my integrity, right? Like that's still being committed to another person because you're still letting them know how you feel and you're giving them that intention of like, I want to work on this if I can. But if they're not giving you anything back, right? Like there's just nothing you can do about that. You're dragging them up a hill they don't even want to come on, So yeah, I think it's really about recognizing what's good for you. And any situation that isn't good for you, I promise you it's not good for the other person either. Even if it looks like it's a win for them, it's not. Like they don't need to have that behavior going on. If they're stepping all over you, that's bad behavior for them too, right? Like they don't need to be doing that. It's not helping them in any real way.
Yeah. So like, when I think about that whole idea of being pulled, and then, trying to let go, like for me, I hold on to things for a long time, not just relationships, but everything has to have a purpose and I've committed to it. But I think about this idea of like energetics kind of compared to chemistry. And some people will have this like amazing chemistry with someone who it just isn't kind of on a practical level good for them, whether there's competing values, whether it's a toxic relationship or something. But how can you distinguish between like that chemistry or that pull and then like what is healthy energetics?
Yeah. So the dating funnel is like the gym for this because it's the duality of kind of logistics and how we have to operate and live in this world and the energetics, that chemical connection to someone. So a lot of times we think that those two things are separate because that's sort of the dynamic we bounce around. So we'll have maybe just this very strong chemical connection to somebody and they're not good for us. But we're like, well, if I leave this, I'm going to lose this. I'm going to lose that connection and I'm never going to have it again. But they're not mutually exclusive. That's just how it's showed up in our reality based on our own thought process, right? We've kind of created that reality for ourselves. And so we have to be shown again, no, like you can have really high chemistry and still pay a mortgage. Like you can still have really intense feelings for each other and not wind up in jail, right? Like these are not mutually exclusive things. Like, but we don't always see them that way. Sometimes in our reality, and sort of we get with somebody who's like perfect on paper and we don't have chemistry. And then we have the opposite. And then we're like, well, God, I guess they're like mutually exclusive, but they're not. We just haven't experienced it yet. But again, it's like that experience of having to walk on faith a little bit, where once you've experienced these high levels of connection, but this person is still responsible and you can still ground that relationship into a reality, depending on how it looks, right? Like, and it doesn't have to look the same for everybody. It doesn't have to have the white picket fence house. Like that's not everybody's choice. So everyone's relationship can look a little different, but you can have those two things. And that's what the dating funnel helps you set up, right? So you're cutting out anything logistically from the get-go. That's like your first step. So if you want kids and they don't go any further. There's just no point. There's no point, right? Because that's going to be what ends you. And that's actually another thing I tell people a lot is like, if you're fighting about something within the first few weeks, that's going to be the thing that your relationship ends over. I can like 98% of the time guarantee you that. So like if you're fighting about their work schedule within like 2 to 3 weeks of dating, I pretty much like guarantee it. Like you just shouldn't have those kinds of levels of discord that early on. And if you do, something's off, right? And so I think that's something that the dating funnel, again, like, because if it does not matter, if you want kids and they don't, even if you have this amazing connection, you're looking at the end in sight, right? Like there's going to be a point where you want something that they don't. And there's no good end to that. Either you give up something you really want or they get into something they don't want.
Yep.
And so logistics are very important in that. And so even if you are madly in love with someone and they have a drinking problem, you can't go any further. Like until they get that worked out, there's just really no point. What can you do? Right? Like if they're having sleepovers with their ex, like it doesn't matter how into them you are. Like, so logistics really, at least somewhat, has to be the first step. And then once you kind of get that safety foundation, then you can get into the higher levels of connection and chemistry, and you can create that from a very soft, safe foundation. So if you think you have had high levels of chemistry with someone who was unstable, wait until you get into a relationship that is stable, because everything grows from that foundation. So if you have safety, if you have trust, if you have connection, oh my God, the places you're able to go with that versus this instability, because you're never fully able to trust somebody that's that level of instability, right? But if you can create that soft and solid foundation, oh my God, like you'll experience so much more connection and chemistry than you could ever have done before. But it's just something we haven't always experienced. And we're not taught it either. We're taught kind of that paradigm that you either have connection or you have stability. But it's like, no, you can have both. Like, absolutely.
And you're not a psychologist, obviously, but like, don't you think that people need to find that within themselves first before they go? Like you're talking about the stability, all of these great things, but a lot of people don't have that in themselves, you know?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Like even through my own experiences, now since the last time we talked to you, doing divorce law, it's just absolutely fascinating to me, how many people either just were incompatible from the get-go or become so incompatible over the course of the relationship. And a lot of that is internal, you know? Yeah. And like, is there a place in the world for, do people need to learn stuff through relationship, or can they just learn these things in life, like without relationship? Like, what are we here on this earth for, Bethany? Can you please answer that question? Like, are we here to be thriving in relationships with people? I mean, our whole podcast is rock that relationship, right? But we focus mostly on romantic relationships this entire time that we've been doing the podcast, but those are important, very important, right? They're usually central to people's lives, but there's so many other relationships going on around us. And I feel like the work has to just be done internally. And
yeah, you should always be doing work internally. Even if you're in a like healthy, thriving relationship, you're always, my personal theory, right? Like there's a lot of them that people have, but I think we're here to evolve. I think we're here to learn. I think that's the whole point of why we're here. And relationships give us that mirror to be able to do that. And they can help us evolve that much more quickly because it's that energetic feedback loop of what am I putting out? What am I missing? And a healthy relationship with anybody, a friend, a family member, if they can reflect back to you, then you're evolving. If you have a bad habit and you just don't know it, but it's wrecking your life and someone can help you point that out, you're evolving so much faster than if you've just been trying to sort it out on your own for like 20 years, right? If you have a strong partner who's like, hey, so like, you know, I really care about you, but I think we need to talk about like the way you act in arguments is really detrimental to the people around you. And you're like, whoa, you know, I have no idea that I was doing that. Now you've evolved and your relationships and your life are that much faster, right? So, and that much smoother. So I think we're here to evolve. I think we're here to learn. I think relationships of all kinds are the portal to that kind of process. I think we can go so much faster if we're using the relationships around us to provide that loop of what do I need to learn? Why am I here? But there are times in our lives where a relationship is not always the best thing for us. And I think different people, what I see with working with the astrology charts, you can see the people who will evolve in relationships in a very specific way. They're kind of meant to evolve through relationships even more so than other people. Some people do better on their own. Their evolution goes faster kind of through friends or family or travel or whatever it is. And some people are meant to evolve more through friendships or communities or even spiritual or religious practices. You can see it outlined in their chart, kind of the ways that they're sort of meant to evolve, I guess. But or the pathways.
So when you say their chart, like if I come back to you now, would my chart be different than when you did it before? Like, can the chart change, or will you just say, here, look, I pointed this out to you before, and now you're like, this is what you're fulfilling from.
So the birth chart doesn't change. There are transit and progression charts. Those change based on kind of what's going on. But your birth chart is like, you're always going to be a Virgo. That's not going to shift, right? But you can sort of see different pathways that people will take. And Virgos in general have specific lessons that they're kind of here to learn, which is why the chart helps, right? Like if you're an Aries, I can tell you like, this is usually what you're having to learn in relationships. This is usually what sort of obstacles, like just baseline Aries have to learn to control their temper, right? Like that is pretty much across the board because Aries are very aggressive. They're ruled by Mars. It's one of our life lessons. All of the Aries pretty much have to get on that train, like and figure that out. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where the chart helps figure out how are you supposed to be evolving. And even just like, for example, Aries are much more independent of a sign than say a Libra. A Libra is much more likely to develop in a partnership than an Aries. And the way I kind of compare it would be like an Aries relationship, they usually are more like late bloomers as far as long-term relationships. It's like somebody going to college and then getting a job and then bringing a partnership. That's Aries versus Libra would be kind of the vibe of you get with your high school partner and you build a life together. You're evolving together. And those are kind of the different ways that people can kind of build a life, right? And there's not one that's over the other. There's nothing wrong with the way Libra often does that. There's nothing wrong with the way Aries does it. You're just looking at different perspectives and different timelines. So like maybe you wanted a lifetime where you built on your own. Maybe you wanted a lifetime where you didn't have to build on your own. You're tired of like dragging everything behind you and you want a partner to help you. So that's where the chart can kind of come in and help you. But even in those type of Libra pairings or any relationship, you've got to be able to stand on your own 2 feet regardless, because you're here on your own for this lesson. You can have people in your life, but people come and go, you know, and you have to be able to do that work and stand on your own. And if you don't have that foundation in yourself, then yeah, you can't have it in relationships. So it's always internal work. Even in relationships, you're always doing that work. And you're always processing and learning.
So with that said, can someone play catch up? You know, like if you are in a relationship with someone and you are, you know, evolving more so, or you've done more self-work, but then you got someone who's sort of a, like you said, a late bloomer. You know, I'm thinking about these relationships where you say like, to what extent is this other person willing to work on themselves and develop themselves? And, or do I leave because this sort of seems like we've hit a dead end on their growth, which is impacting my ability to thrive?
Yeah. Yeah, that is something, it's kind of like, there's like a term in the spiritual world, it's like spiritual drifting. It's kind of like, when you're on the highway and a car gets behind the like 18-wheeler and you're in the drift and you're just kind of like riding that wave, but you're not actually doing anything. So if an individual in a relationship is growing, evolving, then their vibration can raise up the other person. The other person can kind of come along for the ride, but they will hit a stopping point and the other person usually feels like they're sort of dragging them behind. Like there's just no other way than to open yourself up to the experience of self-work and growth and improvement. It would be like, the same with like an addiction, right? Like it does not matter how much other people do for that person until they say, I want to get clean. I want to be sober. I want to heal. I want to do whatever. I want to get out of this toxic relationship. It has to be your choice because again, we have that free will aspect. So if we want to like dig in our heels and be like, I'm fine, I don't need to improve at all. Like you're free to do that. But like you're going to hit a lot of roadblocks and get bumped around a lot by the universe, but you have that choice. People do it all the time. We see people who go an entire lifetime and you're like, I don't see any change here. So we have that choice, but yeah, so they can drift behind the individual, right? They can come behind them on some of the partner's spiritual work. But if they're not saying there's a problem here, I need to work on myself. What am I doing wrong? Where can I improve? Yeah, they're going to hit a block. And the person who is doing the self-work is just going to have to move on because there's really not much else you can do. If there's a problem and someone is saying, I don't see a problem. And if there is a problem, it's not me. You can't do anything about that. They're just not going to do anything about that.
But when you say that, it's like going against the cultural norm, right? Because now I have the TV on all the time because I'm working at home. And so it makes this boring legal work better. And everything in all these like cheesy shows is about saving other people, right? Mm-hmm. And so when you say like, yes, the addict isn't going to get better until they decide they want to get better. But when you watch all of these shows, it's always the family member, the partner, whatever, that ends up like being that person's savior. And I think there's this whole paradigm in society that like we have to help others. And it's not until you get older. And, my therapist called it the fuck at 50s. It's like when you can't take care of people anymore. And that is what you help me with, is that it's not my job to bring other people along. It's their thing. It's my job to worry about me and do my own thing. And it's their job to do their own thing. And I think it's interesting when you are with someone who's not willing to do that work. Like, I'm no longer interested. And I was married to someone who looked at me, who said, I did not do my own work and that I vomited my trauma all over everyone. And I 100% see that now. And now I don't want to be with someone who's not willing to process their work. And everyone has a reason. It's too expensive. I can't find a therapist. I don't have the time. I don't want to do this. But really, like for me, all the money I've spent on these things and all that's been so worth it just to even know myself and what I want. And I think that will make me, and I already am, a much happier person than I used to be.
And I think it's even really to open up to self-work and to the universe and it's really small. It's really subtle. You don't have to like pay $1 million for a therapist. And sometimes that's not even the best option, right? Like I had a Beverly Hills therapist that was like $300 an hour and she was like the worst therapist I've ever had. Like, so it's not about like even financial or time. I mean, and that's the advice I give to people who want their partner to open up to it, or if they're, looking at a friend in a toxic relationship, or they're, whoever's an addict or whatever, and they're like thinking they have to do these big things to get them out of it. But it can be a really small step. It can be like having them go to the gym. It could be introducing them to a book. I had literally one book like cured me of panic attacks. Like it really can be just something very small that sets off just the right combination for them to start down that path. It can be meditation class that can be, and all of that stuff is online, right? Like there are free apps for some of that stuff. Like it can be, you don't have to do this big giant thing. You can do a very small step, but the baseline of all of it is you have to be open to it. You have to say like, okay, I'm ready. I'm open. Something's not working. I want to change. I want to, or even if you don't think it's something wrong with you, but like, I want to grow. I want to get better. I want to improve my life. I want to improve my relationship. Any of that, like one small step of that is going to bring in the light, and that leads to something else, and that leads to something else. And you see stories all over the place of like people who were in, just like really terrible relationships, and they were able to like, they went to the gym, or they went to like a meditation class, or they went to a class at the community college, and it just like opened them up. They like met new people, they got community, they started opening themselves up to different things, and they were able to change their lives based on kind of one simple decision. So for somebody who is like creating those type of excuses, it's like, no, this don't hold up. Like you have to be open. That's really all you have to do. And the minute you open up to that, even if you're journaling by yourself, even if you're sitting quietly for 5 minutes, like literally anything that says, okay, talk to me, like I'm listening, you're going to bring in a lot of light and self-work and changes and growth. But like, you have to like, that's it. That's the bottom line. You have to be the one to say it, because the people around you, the universe, everybody can give you signs. Everyone can try to help you. But if you don't let that in, then the law of free will keep that from coming in. You get to make that decision, right? You have that choice.
Yeah. And I love that, because I remember, kind of early on in my attuneness to my self-growth, I was thinking of a lot of more traditional things. Like I have to go to a therapist. I have to do meditation. I'm like, oh, I don't like meditation. I don't want to do meditation, but you have to do it because that's how you're going to open up your portal. And then, hearing you talking about that there's so many things that don't even appear to be process oriented, or don't even appear to be introspective. Just literally going to the gym, all of a sudden you met new people, or you set a goal, or you got into a new habit, and all of a sudden you're learning about yourself. And and I like that, because I think that maybe those will open up some of the abilities to go to these deeper places where you can maybe process with a therapist. It's like a gateway, but it's also in and of itself fine. I mean, for me, like with my healing after a breakup, really, I would say there's two things that saved me. And one of them was walking every day. And one of them was writing. And I joined a writing group. At first I was writing a book for work, and the other one I'd walk and listen to the news. So it wasn't anything like deep, but I had this like time for myself, and I learned a lot about what I needed in the process, which was some introverted time. As an extrovert, I was always just making myself feel like I had to go be with people. And I realized how much I loved the introverted piece of myself. And so I like, the idea that it's kind of a really nice way of saying there's a lot of things we can do to, enhance ourselves and essentially increase our vibrations and get back in touch with ourselves. So I really like what you're saying about that.
Yeah. And I think we see kind of people who are like, oh, well, I meditate for like 2 hours a day, or I threw away my whole life and went to a cave. And it's like, everyone doesn't need to do that. That's not everyone's path. Like like you can have a lot of spiritual enlightenment, and you can actually have more than even people doing things like that, because if they're not doing it for the right reasons, it's not getting in. So you can have a very spiritual and connected and happy life just from doing these little things and having that connection. We don't need to like go to gurus. We don't need to look outside ourselves, really. Like we can do all of this with the help from the universe. It can be a book, it can be anything. Like all of this information is collective. Everything about this is in ourselves. Gurus are not teaching us anything that we don't already know. Everything in my book is collective knowledge. This is like perennial philosophy stuff. This has come around in metaphysics, different religions, all of that, right? Like this is not brand new information for anybody. This is stuff that we already know. So all we're doing is opening ourselves back up to that and taking those steps, and then the universe is going to meet us right away, right? So like, we don't have to meditate for 2 hours a day. I meditate for like an hour a day, but I also do a lot of spiritual work and guidance and astrology and tarot and whatever. So like, I need to do that, because it would be the same as, anybody else's job. If they're a doctor, they take medical courses. Like it's the same thing, but everyone's not doing astrology work or spiritual stuff or whatever It's like, you don't have to do that kind of stuff. If that's not your goal in life, you can still have a very connected life and meditate 10 minutes a day. I know lots of people who have a wonderful life and they don't even meditate. They walk in nature for like 30 minutes a day. I mean, it doesn't matter. There's not like a specific way to do it. As long as you're opening yourself up, you're going to get the path that's right for you.
And then can you do this with your partner too? I mean, so they're opening themselves up. Are you hoping that this is sort of happening in tandem? Maybe they have something that's totally different than you're doing. I mean, how much of this stuff can you do to grow as a couple?
You can use all sorts of methods as a couple. Like that's what Tantra is. That's what Kama Sutra is. Like you can use these things for enlightenment purposes as a couple. But again, those are kind of certain pathways that people take, but it's not that you can't value from them without going all in on them, right? But like meditating together, doing yoga together, I mean, these are massive ways that as a couple you can raise the vibe of the relationship. But you don't have to do that, right? Like if somebody else feels more connected going out in nature, somebody else would rather, sit in meditation. I mean, you can have different aspects. It's got to be right and aligned for you. If you have one person doing something because like, oh, it's the right thing to do, or my partner wants me to do it, it's all about intention. That's what's really creating the vibe and the energetic. So if they're doing it out of like guilt or like, that's heavy, you can feel energetically how heavy that is. So it's really about finding each person's alignment and then where can you come together as a couple. And if you are on the same track and you're on the same kind of spiritual development, you can use higher couple practices. Like there's all sorts of, and when I say Tantra, I don't even mean just like the physical Tantra, like tantric practices are the heart connection. So you're literally like, some of those practices are sitting in front of your partner and connecting kind of through the heart chakra. And like people get visions from doing that. Like it's just like utilizing a combined energetic to go to a higher evolution. But again, these are like higher practices that not everybody needs to follow. But even something simple like that, where you're just sitting in front of your partner and feeling their energy and letting them feel yours, even that, you're elevating, you're putting your relationship on a completely different level. And there's like one or two practices they talk about in the book that can do the same thing, where you can raise the vibration of your relationship as a couple. And so there's tons of practices for that. But everybody and every couple's different. Every path is different, but you've got to have that same commitment level to get to some of these higher levels. But as far as having a healthy, thriving relationship, I mean, we know people who have that and they don't do anything. They just sort of have it. Like they're just compatible enough and they just have these healthy communications and they just kind of figure it out. Some of the things I do see, though, are the people who get together that have this really natural compatibility communication. They can struggle when they disagree on something because they don't have the skill set to overcome that. So I've had couples that have like big arguments over something like very small because they don't have the communication skill set, because they've like never disagreed on anything. And they're like, do I need to end my marriage over this? And you're like, that is the smallest disagreement I've ever heard in my life. Like I had a couple that it was like over Chinese takeout containers, and it was like one of them thought they were bad for the environment, and so they would reheat them to use the same one. And the other person was like, but they're full of chemicals, so now you're ingesting chemicals. So they didn't agree on like what was better to use for these containers. And they thought it was like going to end their relationship. And it was like, that is the smallest disagreement I've ever heard in my life. Like you can really easily navigate this. But if you don't have that skill set of like how to communicate in conflict, like you can get to that place. But generally speaking, like if you can set up some of these things and you're already naturally compatible, you're going to have a really good relationship without hours of tantric work, right? So it just depends on what you want. Like some people are more naturally inclined to spiritual practices. Like I love getting high off of tantric work. Like I like that, but that's not everybody. Like everyone does not have to do that. Like
how can people find you so they can do work with you if they want? They can get your book on Amazon, right? The Secret Energetics of Relationships. And are you still doing work with individuals?
Yeah, so I've kind of split the sessions into energetic sessions where I'm using the astrology to support. And I'm really just reading your energy. And then I have the astrological consult, which is like if you have a very specific thing going on and you want to see the astrology behind it, then we'll look at your chart. And then I have the astrocartography as its own separate. You can pay to have like all of it kind of in one, but yeah, that's usually how I've been breaking it up. And BethanyNicole.com is where all of that is. I have my blog on there. There's tons of info of like how to find your chart, zodiac compatibility, energetics, all of that's on there. And you can book sessions through it.
Well, that's awesome. Well, Bethany, we could talk to you for hours. Now that we've officially deemed you the resident astrologer, then and astrocartographer and all sorts of things. We hopefully get to keep in touch and have you back as we move through some of these future topics. But thank you again so much for being here today and talking about thriving in relationships through energetics. And for all of our listeners out there, until our next episode, go out there and rock those relationships. If you liked what you heard, check out our show notes for resources from today's episode. Make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram under Rock That Relationship, and go to our website at rockthatrelationship.com for updated episodes and more great information.
Thanks for listening. Now go rock those relationships.